PvP. A big conversation for BDO, a big point of contention often in the community. Is this a PvP game? Is it not? Well, according to PA and the way they advertise this game and the way many people would advertise this game, they would say that this is a PvP game. Now, that is not always the case. One of the things that people will find with BDO's PvP is that the ratio that you get to PvP versus when you don't is quite skewed and not in the benefit towards PvP. This is something that we're going to be just looking into real quick of like how much PvP does BDO actually have, and on top of that, what are some big issues with BDO's PvP. That'll be divided into a couple of parts. We're going to be taking a look at getting gear checked, build viability, difficulty to train properly against a realistic scenario. Next we could look at some mechanics, RNG resists, no easy way to tell if someone resisted you in the middle of a fight, and sometimes the player not being rewarded in PvP for doing the right thing. And then we'll take a look at Solaire and some approaches to PvP to make it a little bit more enjoyable, even for a more casual player. And we'll just be sitting there and taking a look. So part one here. PvP is something that is not for everybody. That's something I do want to iterate. I don't think that in an MMO especially that every single type of player is going to enjoy PvP. Just because someone doesn't enjoy PvP doesn't make them any less of a player, but also if you do enjoy PvP, it doesn't mean that you're a toxic criminal that everybody hates. So with that said, let's just take a look into why does BDO's PvP really need some improvement in some places, and how much of it you're actually doing. So let's first take a look at the biggest thing that comes up for BDO PvP, and that's called getting gear checked. Yep, everyone has probably experienced this feeling. You've made some gains, you've gotten to a pretty decent item rating, and what happens? Someone comes in and hits one button and kills you. This is not a very exciting feeling for new players. It becomes something that discourages people from pursuing PvP. Now, I know what some of you are saying, well, it's a game where gear matters, and that's a big deal. And you're 100% correct. But the real question becomes then is, why does it take so long in the game to get to a point where that's not happening to you? And people will say, well, those people are higher geared, go fight other people at lower gear. Well, there's kind of a big issue with that as well. One of those first being that it's very rare in the game to actually run into people who are at an even gear score with you. Even being a couple of brackets higher than somebody is a big difference. It's the difference between one comboing somebody and not. Someone being a little bit further ahead in their gears, a difference between them resisting you, evading an attack, having more accuracy so they hit more. All of these things make a really big difference, especially when you start bringing in things like player skill. Just because you're not a master at the game does not mean that PvP should be you getting dogged on the entire time. That's not a very fun experience for players. Gear checking is something that PA needs to really take a look at some point. And now, I'm not saying that we level sync and do all those things that kind of destroy RPG advancement in a game, but I do think that PA can add more activities where gear scores even allow people to experience being in different builds, allow them to experiment, and outside of a trial. Because here's the thing with trials are not your player character. We play MMORPGs and make a character, and we want to play on that character. That is something that doesn't change from game to game. I think most people would agree with that. And I think getting gear checked is something that has huge negative implications on the game. It first discourages people from going down the PvP path. They just say, baby, this game's not for me and the PvP is not for me, and then they just start doing the PvE, which we'll talk about in another video. But then you won't, after that, they continue to get bullied at spots. People can go out of their way to make their life hell. And also, there isn't any course of retaliation. You see, just because someone has more gear than you, you literally can't do anything. Like, some people will have high evasion or higher evasion. Often when we see these videos, they talk about, when you get to the end game, you'll get enough accuracy to overcome evasion and stuff. But what about like literally the 1,000 hours before you get to that point? Thousands of hours, I might add. Hundreds of hours, right? What happens during that time? Why does that experience for PvP have to be so brutal towards the player? And I think there's a simple solution to this, is give players more avenue to experience PvP. Because for those who want to experience PvP, players like me who love PvP, who get into games because of their PvP, and every MMO I play, I am mainly a PvPer. And even I have issues with the way BDO conducts its PvP. And I think that a better solution will be is giving more options for the players between their grinds to engage in PvP, to practice on more even fields. And we'll talk about Solaire in a bit, but I think they can go even beyond Solaire. Solaire is not on all the time. But we'll get to that part when we do. So the next big thing that really discourages players and I think hurts PvP is players don't really get into a good build till many, many hours. Thousands, hundreds of hours for some people go by before you can actually start really thinking about your build. Like you'll see on the internet talking about PvP, evasion, accuracy, DR, this, that, all of that really doesn't matter while you're gearing. And when you're in that process, it can feel like an eternity. And you don't really, some classes do better as evasion classes. Some classes do better as DR or need high amounts of accuracy because they're accuracy starved. And majority of the player base don't actually get to sit there and make builds because of this. And I think this really hurts PvP. This kind of like pushes back a little bit on the progression topic, but at the same time, players really need a way to start practicing their builds at what they're trying to go for. And it also can help players develop goals. And this is one of the big reasons why PvP struggles in this game and why it struggles to actually hold people. There are people who PvP and enjoy the game and for PvP. I'm not saying that there's zero PvPers walking around, but there could be more. And more PvPers is healthier for the end game of this game. People quit the game, people take breaks. You need other players to replace and replenish those ranks. You should have more players in Node Wars. You should have more players wanting to engage in Siege. And there are many players who want to engage in these activities and are held back by getting gear checked while they were all leveling, so they have a bad taste in their mouth. They can't have a build going quite yet, so they don't feel like a beneficial part of a team. And then you got another big point here, which is difficulty to train properly against a realistic scenario. Arsha open world PvP is not only lackluster because of the gear checking, but assuming you do get into fights with players, it can become very difficult to feel a sense of simulation in the game of what you should be realistically fighting against. Because players are struggling to get into their gear, it's really hard to understand how you should fight certain classes, how you should be conducting your class as a player, because gear checking goes both ways, right? So you have one person doing the gear checking. So like, let's say you're fortunate enough to be the person doing the gear checking, and this is your main experience for PvP. You're not practicing against a realistic scenario. And the real reality is, just because someone's a PvPer doesn't mean they have time for Node Wars. It doesn't mean, and also Node Wars Tier 1, Tier 2 are completely different games. Uncapped, a completely different game. There isn't a solid foundation of what the PvP experience of BDO is supposed to be. What power should players be fighting at in BDO? There are so many different tiers to PvP, and it becomes like a problem because when it gets confusing, some classes get a little weaker as they get stronger, right? That becomes a huge issue. They get weaker. It's You know, like they feel like they went backwards in power. Some classes scaled slower than other players, and that can feel really bad when players are doing that. And now they don't get an experience of having to peel for other players and things like that, because everyone's one-tapping each other in most of the PvP that people see. And that's out like on Arsha, that's in places like RBF, right? These are places where they can go and hunt for PvP, and they're going to get some really bad experiences, and it puts a bad taste in people's mouth. And I think that's something that can be worked on. I think the thing with this section of the video is that I think these are things that will not change, personally. I think they are kind of just how BDO is, unfortunately. It doesn't matter how much speed up you do for players unless you actually get them into the end game brackets where they're not being one-tapped. They actually have evasion if they need it, they have accuracy if they need it, and they're mainly focused on horizontal progression, getting those items upgraded, and that's why they're grinding. But I don't think this is going to change, because how PA utilizes this is kind of supposed to be your motivator to get more powerful in the game. If you are a tier 1 or tier 2 Node Wars player, this probably doesn't pertain to you. If that's where you find your PvP, not everyone does. In fact, I would argue majority of the players don't, is because that's a lot of commitment. Node Wars are a commitment. They are hours, sometimes long, Siege even longer, and not everyone has that ability. There is no way for people in this game to log on and drop in and play. And I know some people are going to say, what about Solaire? But we'll get to Solaire's issues. But first, we also need to look at the mechanics of PvP. PvP mechanics. That is something that is a big contention point for the community. People are on many sides of the fence, I guess you could say, of how mechanics operate in PvP. Now, before getting into the mechanics, when I say we're talking about the mechanics, we're talking about things like RNG resists, how CCs work, the types of CCs in the game. You know, at a mechanical level, what are players using as their tools to win in PvP? So, I really do think that mechanically, this game is very flawed in PvP. It has many aspects of it that hold the game back. And one of those aspects is RNG resists, right? These are things that turn PvP into a less consistent experience. It is a dice roll if the player is going to have a fun time. It's a dice roll if the player is going to get to do combos. It essentially trivializes a lot of the PvP. And I know that's going to make a lot of the hardcore PvP community a little bit upset hearing that, because this game is their baby. You know, it's like what they love, and it's what they've spent a lot of time getting good at. And the real reality is, well, maybe at the most high-end level, when people are utilizing every single ability in their class kit, when people are making very little mistakes, then it feels better. It feels okay. But here's the thing, you could say that about just about any game. What this does is it affects the day-to-day players. It affects the general population in a negative way. But why is that? Why do RNG resists hold the PvP back of this game? Well, let's do for starters. You need to begin almost every combo chain with some degree of CC. It needs to either be a float, stiff, slow, something. Something needs to occur in this game for you to start your combo. Otherwise, you are asking to get your face caved in if you're just going to sit there and mindlessly go through your combo. And a lot of the kiting and running around that you see on YouTube and stuff, if you're a newer player to this game, is you'll see people dodging, iframing, getting out of the way as super armoring, because they're trying not to get CC'd by the enemy player. Perfectly fine system. This actually makes the game quite interesting. It's a little bit different. You want to keep track of your cooldowns and your CCs and things like that, because that's how you start your combos. That's how you get a kill in this game, and intense winning in this game. So what happens when you take all of that and you leave it up to a dice roll if you're going to actually get the CC off? So your victory that day is going to be dependent on, does your grab land? Does your float land? Does your knockdown actually knock the people down that are around them? And the thing is, PA has designed their game this way. They have designed their classes to have a CC followed up by a combo, because that's the only way you can do damage properly. Because in order to make health bars really move, unless you're a very specific class, is to knock someone down, get down attacks, get crits, get back attacks. Things like that are extremely important for the player to do extensive damage, to delete somebody per se. Because in this game, especially when you get to more and more larger scale and you start adding more players into the conflict, well, you're going to see more and more damage go out. You're going to see more and more players dealing damage in one place. And that means when you CC somebody, you need to kill them quickly, because you're going to get peeled and you're going to get killed. Whether it's by a ranged person or a Zerker or something, someone is going to come and do damage to you, or you're going to get hit by many of the AoE CC abilities in this game and get CC'd. And you need to get out, because you only have so long of protected rotation. Now, the problem, as you can already see here, is getting that CC is going to be a risk, especially if you're a grab class, right? You go in, you want to go grab somebody. Well, a lot of grabs are unprotected in this game. And what happens when you deal with an unprotected grab? You get punished if the grab doesn't go off, because you haven't CC'd the person that you intended to CC. You are now exposed, and you can get hit, and you can get CC'd by an AoE. Something that might not even be aimed for you. That's the best thing. You could have totally been stealthy and sneaky and clever, and you still just get hit by the AoE CC, and it wasn't meant for you. And you take a lot of damage because you got knocked down. And vice versa could happen, right? You could be trying to peel for somebody, your teammate is screaming for you for help, and you're like there saying, please help me, I am being CC'd. You come in, you deliver your CC, and watch your CC get resisted, and your teammate dies. This makes the game inconsistent. This can determine people losing and winning fights, winning node wars, winning Solaire rounds. This stuff makes huge differences for players. And this part of the game makes a consistent PvP experience be very inconsistent. Today, you can feel like you're on top of the world because your class's CCs landed. Tomorrow, you could feel like your class can't do anything because your enemy keeps resisting you. This is a huge problem in PvP, and PA really needs to look at it, because it does drive players away from PvP. It does create frustration. It is what many would call quit moments, right? In a game, especially a live service game, you want to minimize quit moments as much as you can, and the PvP mechanics are huge quit moments. Now, I think stepping away a little bit from the RNG, because I think it's pretty clear why you shouldn't have that in the game. There are other things that are also an issue that kind of lean on being resisted. Is, let's say you are in the middle of a combo. So the first CC has landed. You're in the middle of the combo. Now, to extend combos, you often have to do a CC, do some damage, hit them with another CC, and that usually caps them out and makes them immune to CC for a little while, unless you are using something like a down smash, which you can use to keep extending your combos, because it keeps them on the floor. Let's say they resisted something in the middle of your combo. Now, in this game, there's a lot of stuff going on the screen, and it is not really clear. So a lot of times, especially in when you're in a group fight, because I don't think one-on-one is a great way to measure a game's mechanics, because this game falls apart real hard if you sit there and measure one-on-one. There are clearly classes and stuff that are better for one-on-one, and the game promotes Solaire, Node Wars and Siege, and Guild Wars, like GVGs. It promotes those are what the game actually promotes, and that's probably what the developers usually balance around when it comes to PvP, whenever they do balance. The big issue here is that you could be halfway through a combo, someone can resist your CC, and you don't know it, and because there's so many visual effects, you didn't see it, and they get up and they grab you. You would have backed off if there was something way more clear to you as a player that this is occurring, that they resisted it, that they didn't get affected by it. And some people say, well, reduce the visuals of the game. Well, now you can't see a lot of things that are really important to avoid getting CC'd yourself. I don't want the visual clutter to go down because I'd use it for information about my enemy's cooldowns, and I don't want to miss something because I tried to make it easier to see if I got RNG resisted. What they need to do is make it really apparent someone resisted you. Like, it should take priority over all other effects in the game for a moment. Like, and it should let you know that you need to back off because this person is getting up. And sometimes by the time you've realized this, it's too late. And then they grab you and they turn it on you, and then sometimes you die, right? And you just got wrecked by that, and it feels bad. And I think this system could feel a lot better going down. The other thing too, when it comes to being resisted, mechanically, is you get punished as a player for doing nothing wrong. Like, you go in, you landed your CC, you spent resources, you spent cooldowns to put yourself in that position to do that, and you didn't get rewarded for it as a player, and now your opponent knows that you have a lot of stuff on cooldown. They know that you do not have the capability of doing this again for a certain period of time, and they can push on you and aggress on you, and now you're at a position of disadvantage for doing absolutely nothing wrong. Tell me how many games that are PvP games have you do the right thing, and then after you do the right thing, give you a percentage chance to be in a position of weakness. World of Warcraft doesn't even do that. You know, ESO doesn't do that. These, like, if we just go down MMOs, you know, they don't do that. If you're doing the correct thing in an MMO, you generally are going to win almost every single fight. And that becomes an issue. That is fundamentally bad. I don't care what game you are. That is a fundamental issue with the game, that you could do the right thing and be in a worse position for doing so. That's insanity. That is actually insane, and they need to look at that really badly. And losing a fight because of that sucks. Losing a node war because of that sucks. Losing a ranked Solaire match because of that sucks. It really does. And this is something they need to look at. If they want more players to PvP in this game, because look, the game will always have its hardcore lead. It's always going to have players who just love this game and love PvPing in this game. And guess what? A lot of them also play the game despite these features. I think that's something we have to keep in mind, is us playing the game is not us saying that these features are good. That's not the same thing. But they really need to look at the way resists work. The last thing I really want to talk about was slows. Now, I know slows got nerfed recently, but slows are way too effective in PvP. They are way too effective. You can slow players' attack speed to the point where their class becomes unplayable. Like, that is ridiculous, and they are not hard to land, because you will slow anyone who did not resist with the frontal guard, and many classes don't have a frontal guard. You know, like, that's a big thing. That is a big thing in the game. And watching your character move in slow motion is painful. And then dying because your character is moving in slow motion is also painful. And that feels terrible. It feels like there's really no proper counterplay to this CC. It is very easy to apply it to a large AoE of people. And you can actually put these things called skill enhancements on your abilities, which put new effects, or additional effects I should say, on your abilities, and you can stack slows. You can make the game really unplayable for some people in their classes, and that needs to be also looked at. It should not be a GG, I take an L because my ninja is moving in slow motion, because someone dropped a giant AoE in the middle of a fight that I have to contribute to, that is on a relatively short cooldown, and can do it again and again. And to give some people an idea, this isn't like a World of Warcraft slow where your movement speed is slowed and that's about it. They will literally slow the speed in which you do abilities. Like, you are going to do a swing in slow motion and it's not going to do its damage until X part of the animation is complete. Our movement in this game is based off of using abilities to move from place to place. Now imagine when your abilities are all happening in slow motion, throwing off your ability to animation cancel, to move from one place to the other. It really makes it feel brutal. And some of these slows last for a long time. They last for 10 to 15 seconds. They can be cycled because people can put slows on those skill enhancements on various abilities. So you are constantly having a slow on you in many fights. It kind of becomes a joke when you have to spend an entire round slowed when the enemy had to take no effort to apply those slows. That does not make sense. There needs to be a way in which only when a player is not in SA or obviously an iframe avoids a slow. Frontal guard will stop a slow from happening, but not every class has those. SAs should maybe have a way where if you got hit by a slow in an SA, maybe the duration is cut by like in half by what that slow would be, because he hit you during an SA. It's still there, there's still time to capitalize on it, but it needs to be chopped down. I think that is something that's really important, especially since slows can be cycled and constantly applied, and they stack. So like when I say they stack, I mean the different types of slows. So let's say I have an ability A that allows me to apply a movement speed slow, but I can put a skill enhancement on that also puts an attack speed slow. So now I turned a slow ability into an insane slow ability, and it's rotational on a 5 to 8 second cooldown. Now multiply that by everybody else in the lobby doing that, everyone else in the combat scenario doing that, similar things like that, and all of a sudden you are always slowed. This game is fun when it's fast and when the players are getting to use all of their kit and they're getting to sit there and not be in slow motion. It is fun watching two players zip around trying to outskill each other on high APM classes. Even low APM classes, you have very few swings. You have about 4 abilities that are going to do big damage and you're a tanky class. Those abilities can't be in slow motion. You are going to get deleted before you land an ability. Like, that is a problem for everybody. So I think slows really need to have someone look at them over there at PA and really analyze how effective should these things really be. Should they make a class unplayable when applied? If the answer is yes to that, well, that's going to be really annoying for players to play against, and a lot of people are not going to want to experience that. They want to, if you're going to have someone lose games, because losing is frustrating on its own, right? If you're going to have them do that, you need to make sure that it doesn't feel like total crap when it happens. And that's very possible. You can have a player die in a game and not make them feel super duper miserable about it. And that's because the player should feel like when they died, it was because of a button they failed to hit, not because the entire enemy team is cycling slows and they're undodgeable, and now we are slowed. And we are not going to be able to do our rotation at the speed we need to. We're not going to be able to get our CCs out at the speed we need to. And what happens then? You join the game, you do what they're doing, and now it's just a slow fest. And it's not really that fun to play that type of game. So yeah, I think mechanically, if they adjusted those, if they adjusted the RNG resist, they adjusted how slows work, they improved the consistency of the combat when doing your combos, I think the game will have a much better PvP experience for players. It'll make the game also far less convoluted, and players can actually invest in what I would call fun skills. You know, people could, not skills, but stats. It's not that fun to invest in resist. It's boring. It's very, 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 very passive. You know, that's a place you can get some more human damage from. That's some place you can get more attack speed from, you know, things like that. Like, those crystals are quite frustrating. And you could replace those crystals with things that are like, hey, I want to reduce damage while I'm in X type of CC. So you can kind of specialize your character to be more resistant to certain types of CCs over the others. For example, if you get grabbed, maybe after a grab you take less damage from X types of abilities or something like that, right? PA can definitely, I think, look into that direction and still keep those as stats. But for that, I think that's a good place for PvP to really start improving itself, is it's in its mechanics. So kind of like a little recap here for the first 2 parts. Getting gear checked, not be able to get a build going early enough. And difficulty training for real scenarios was in the first part. The second part is these mechanics and that they need to be improved. And I think if they really took steps to improving these two sections of the game, they would have a much better PvP game. But then there's also the other element of PvP that really needs a fix, and that is Solaire. Arena of Solaire. Where to even begin with this one? So, to give some context, Solaire is something that the community has been asking for a long time. It's not something that PA kind of just did out of thin air. Sometimes they do stuff out of thin air that you can't even find anyone who's asked for it. But this was something that people really wanted. They wanted an arena of some type where gear was normalized and we can all compete. No matter how far you are, how many hours you've grinded in the game, as long as you have a level 60 character, you can hop into Arena of Solaire and compete and have a good time. Now, naturally, the PA special was kind of added to this, which is they had to kind of do things in weird ways that made no sense, because this stuff has been done in many games over and over and over again, and how to have fun in it has already been proven. This was not a place where we really needed innovation. We just needed an arena where we can play and have builds and fight each other. Preferably at the max gear, or close to the max gear. High enough so that people can make any type of build they need to in this game. But we'll get to that here. So Arena of Solaire is a ranked version of PvP that only allows solo queue while in the ranked mode. And then there's practice mode when the ranked isn't going, and that allows you to actually make groups and play with each other or queue up as a group of 3. Solaire is a 3v3 game mode, so you can make a full pre-made if you want to. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, first of all, you made the ranked version, the part where people actually care about, or are supposed to care about, I should say, solo only. That really sucks. Because one, let's just start with less about the gameplay itself, but about just an MMO in general. You made the primary progression of this mode, which is your rank, a completely solo experience. In a MMORPG, a game about grouping, generally, a genre, I should say, about grouping up, teaming up, class synergy, things like that. And how do you make those things happen? You get a group together that's also invested in making those things happen. By making it solo only, a lot of players think that there's this really false conception that solo queue is actually a great way to see who's actually good or who's actually deserves to go up and stuff. And that truth can't be farther from that in a game like Black Desert, in a game like World of Warcraft, even in a game like League of Legends, because class synergy is a thing. If you are on a team that has a crappier comp than the other team, or the other comp is a direct counter to your comp, you are going to have a lot of issues with randoms and solo players. Because one, no one's peeling for each other. No one is doing the things that you're supposed to do to win games. But that becomes an issue, right? But if you have a team, you can grab a group of friends, you can all decide what classes you want to play, you can shore up each other's weaknesses. That actually makes a more competitive fight. Now, some will say, well, just make a group queue. That's not going to work either. Because the problem with having group-only queues is that there always will be less groups than there will be solo queuing people. So you just have to have one queue. Many games allow groups of solo players to come together, fight against a group, but the matchmaking should prioritize a group against another group, but you have to keep the queue going. But I think this would become less of an issue with another change I have to propose a little bit later. But beyond just making the game an antisocial experience, luck of the draw of who you get as your teammates to advance in rank, luck of the draw to see what kind of comp you get, to see if you, if you complement it well, like going double shy was not fun. Being on one team like that. Like being the one ninja or hash with a double shy team was actually really annoying to play. It didn't make the matches fun. Watching everyone get a random stack of classes that all counter you. It's not fun. But let's take also a look at the matchmaking itself. Now, I'm going to pair two things up here. I'm going to pair up the matchmaking and the elo system into one because they are affecting the matchmaking. So beyond the first week, the first 2 weeks of Solaire are usually fantastic because you have all the players in there, you have a variety of skills, players that are playing their replacements, they haven't been quite separated out yet. The quality of matches feels a lot higher. Now, what happens is, as the season goes on, less and less people are in queue, and this is natural. This doesn't mean the mode is dead, that doesn't mean the mode's a failure and should not be supported. That's the natural way a season goes, of any ranked game. But there's one big problem. Now that everyone's separated out into their ranks, you have to sometimes play with some players that just have no idea what they're doing. You can get random throwers on your team over and over again, and they can tank your elo, which we'll get into in a second, and you can run into an issue where you get into elo hell. Now, the problem is when you start playing in placements, and they put you in the bracket that you should be in, it's going to get tougher, right? Because players are at the same skill level as you. But here's the problem. The elo system does not care. What it does is you basically lose 25 elo to 20 elo, up or down, regardless of the circumstances. You could completely obliterate a team and get the same elo or you could completely lose a tight close match and you're going to lose the same elo. That's ridiculous, oversimplified, and had no thought put into it whatsoever. You can put like 25 debuffs and get over 100k damage and go into overtime rounds over and over again. You can go into like round 5 where each team is 1-2 and this is winners takes all, which basically means that these teams are evenly matched. Probably no one should lose excessive amount of elos for this game because they both belong here as a team. You're going to still go down, and that can become real troubling because losing streaks are part of the game, and you can go on a long enough losing streak to where it becomes really hard to recover. So for example, I as a player had reached the red rank. I went on a 7-game losing streak, and look, I'm not one of those people who will just quit because you're on a losing streak. I take it as a challenge. I'm playing players who are around my skill level because the matches were close, by the way. These weren't just steamrolls going back and forth. These were close, tight, balls to the wall, sweaty matches, and they were fun. They were exciting. People were in comms, they were peeling. It was really coming down to the wire where every mistake was counting, and it was exciting. But because I had to go on a longer losing streak, and because I enjoy playing the mode, I now have to play in a bracket where I'm clearly better than the other players, and damage doesn't lie about it, where I've won games where I've aced the other team multiple times. And by ace, I mean not the ace the game randomly gives out, I mean actual aces, where I've actually killed 3 people, where I've controlled the entire enemy team repeatedly enough to where I win. That is fun for a little bit, but then you start getting people who are pulling like 6k damage, 10k damage, applying no debuffs, throwing games, clearly throwing games. And you can't climb because you decided to go on a longer losing streak. That feels really bad, and now I'm not getting to play with the players I was enjoying playing the game with, I was in close matches with. I don't feel challenged anymore. But because there's so many of these bad players in the bracket I'm in, you kind of get stuck. And unless you are the top 1% of players in the game where you can just hard carry all the way through every single match, you're not going to move. And it makes the season feel kind of pointless. Why should I try to get back to just where I was in the season when there's no reason to? And should I deal with people who never go into comms anymore, who don't care at all, and they're playing ranked? And here's the thing, you might say, well, why would people who are playing ranked do that? Because ranked locks you out of practice mode. When ranked is going, practice mode becomes disabled. It's stupid. It makes no sense. So if you and your friends hop on at prime time on a Saturday night and you want to group up of 3 and do Solaire, you can't because ranked is going. And y'all have to solo queue if you want to play Solaire. So what do? We just stopped playing. We stopped engaging with the mode because the elo system is not rewarding me for being a good player. It is punishing me just like it's punishing the other players who clearly don't belong in that bracket, who are going down, and you're going down with them. And if I have to do the thing where, I lose 2 games and I'll stop and wait till the matchmaking changes, that's not really fun. What if that's the free time I have? That's annoying, and that needs a change. So the matchmaking needs and the elo system need big adjustments. They need to take into account people's performance to some degree. But my solution to the issue is a little bit different, but we'll see how, we'll get to that part of the video. So the next thing of why Solaire really needs work, gear limitations. Now, I don't know how PA balances their game. They aren't very transparent about how they balance, what their real philosophy is behind the balance of the game, of what classes should and shouldn't be doing. They'll write some blurbs for why they nerfed or buffed things, but that's where the similarities kind of end, or the transparency ends, I should say. But I know for a damn fact that they don't buff their game around the item rating or the gear score that Solaire puts you in. You can't make an adequate build of anything in Solaire. You don't have enough evasion to be evasion. You can't stack enough accuracy to counter that. You can't get enough DR to really feel it. And the other problem is if you go full DP meme, you don't have enough damage to really make a big impact for your team. So pretty much everyone kind of builds the same. Like, it's not too different. Like, the crystals might be a little different here and there, but outside of that, you miss out on all of the build craft that BDO has to offer. They should have just made this mode for when people are much higher gear. Much higher. Where people can kind of build their way into solutions. That's a big deal. And that's a big problem. And it's a huge turnoff because a lot of classes don't get good until they get to that tier of gear. And a lot of the classes that scale better at the lower AP and DP levels tend to dominate Solaire. They tend to feel oppressive in Solaire because the other classes don't have all the options available, and why would PA balance for the game around a limited mode rather than the rest of the game? So why not make Solaire's gear like the rest of the game? Why not make it a simulation of what it's like to be at that build that is thousands of hours away? Don't know why this had to be done, and it makes the game feel janky. There's players who don't know like what the game is supposed to feel like for PvP, and this is going back on that inconsistency of PvP experience in this game, and that's a really big problem. Let's see, the next thing I hear, no rewards. There are literally no rewards for playing Solaire. It is essentially, in BDO terms, technically a waste of your time. The only people who would really play it are people who just enjoy normalized, evened out PvP. And here's the thing, they do give out an outfit, from my understanding. And now, this is my understanding of it, that the outfit only goes to, I believe, like top 100? That's it? They're the only ones who get rewarded? So if you have no hope of reaching top 100, there's no reward reason to participate. You'd get like a daily or weekly, I remember, that gives you like some crons. I think it's a weekly. I think it's like 100 crons for a weekly. But that's it. That's all you get. You don't get any rewards for playing. You don't get any silver. You don't get any Caphras. You don't get any ancient spirit dust. You don't get anything for playing matches. And unless you are in the top percentile of your class, like the top, the less than 1% of people playing that class, you literally get nothing. What a huge, crappy demoter. You're giving people these tokens for playing matches, and you don't even give them things to spend it on. Like, you use it to unlock gear, to like make some choices, as I put in quotations there, but that's it. That's where that shit stops. Right there. Like, there's no other purpose to that. It feels like such a half-baked system. Why is that the case? Why is there no rewards for spending your time playing ranked Solaire, which is only open at certain times of day? Why not go grind? Why not go find Arsha PvP? That's the big problem. It's a massive problem, and they really need to adjust it. The next thing is, do we really need ranked? So ranked has zero integrity in this game. You might ask why. Well, let's ignore throwing for 2 seconds, because people do throw for each other. Even in solo queue, you can just queue sync. If you get on the same team, you play hard, you win, and now you have more communication than the other team does. Or you get on the other team and you just throw and make it 2v1. That's totally possible to do, and people do it. But let's ignore that. So your elo in this game is family-wide and not class-wide. Huh? Right, like that, the stupidest thing I've ever seen in a class-based game is to give someone the same elo for one class for all their classes. So if you want to go into Solaire and try out Warrior, but you've never played Warrior really, like in a 3v3 scenario there, and you're a bit more green around the edges, you don't get to play placements as a Warrior and then get placed at a lower bracket, so you don't get absolutely demolished. You get put in the same bracket. So Solaire essentially has shared elo. Now, there's two problems with this. Number one, this totally if you really care about your rank, this really deters players from trying new classes in Solaire, trying new comps in Solaire, and trying to fulfill another comp or learn a new class and hop into the arena. The second thing that it does, it takes the ranked leaderboard and completely makes it irrelevant, because you can play the meta and flavor of the month, and you can just climb and then switch to your main and then sit there and pretend like you got there on that class. Like, what? That makes no sense. That is absolutely ridiculous. So there are certain classes that are much easier to climb than on others, and that can totally screw the entire leaderboard up, which starts begging the question, does Black Desert even need a ranked mode? Why do we need it? Our classes are nowhere near balanced. There are so many of them. The game has very different PvP experiences, and we currently have no reward structure outside of the top players. Do we really need that? Do we really need a solo ranked mode in this game that doesn't tell us anything about the players? Because all it tells us is who's good at that bracket. It's not the end game gear, it's not node wars, it's nothing else. It's just that. Like, you can't really judge players in an environment where their classes cannot actually fulfill their potential that they're most likely geared and balanced around. So why do we need this? My solution is to basically say, get rid of ranked, make Solaire one playlist that opens up at certain types of day, allow people to group together, basically take the practice playlist or queue, make that the only queue, open up Solaire for X amount of time, and just let people progress through a battle pass of some kind or a reward structure of some kind. Let them get rewards for playing that season of Solaire, because ranked this game is not competitive. It has RNG based off of its CCs, for crying out loud. It has RNG if you're going to even land your crowd control in a match. Do we really need that to be ranked? Do we need every round to be a crapshoot and make people more toxic and angry at each other for no reason, when we could just have one queue, people can play with their friends and get through a battle pass, and Solaire shows up, maybe once or twice a year? I don't think that'd be too bad. And in fact, it might get even more people in queue, because people won't feel the ranked pressure, they'll be able to play with their friends, and people are actually going to get shit for it. Why would you not participate in that while it's around? That outfit that you give to the top 100, great for the top 100 players of Solaire. It sucks if your class you love to play Solaire on is not that good in Solaire. There's some classes that are just not that good in Solaire because of just how the gear works, but they're perfectly fine in the regular game. So it's not like they need a buff or a special treatment. It's just, this is not an accurate representation of the game. So why are we treating this like ranked? Because we have an arena, it should be ranked? Because now all of a sudden PA wants to follow the meld on that rule? It makes no sense. It really makes no sense at all. And I think that a ranked mode is really not needed for this game. It doesn't add anything. to this game. It's not bringing in players because Solaire isn't around long enough to bring in players. It's not around all the year round. So what's the point, right? You let those players show up and they drop off? No one's going to do that. No one's just going to play BDO when Solaire's around and not do anything else. So let's just get rid of it. It's not necessary. The last thing is the overtime rules are super absurd in Solaire that I wanted to talk about. I just think this is a little silly. It's a small little note. It's based on who has the most health, not who got first blood or something like that. Like, for example, let's say you kill someone on their team and they kill eventually someone on your team. It's based off of who has the most HP in the pool. So and it's percentage based, so it's not just because you have more health than the other player. It doesn't mean anything. If they're at 32% health and you're at 32% health, it's going to be considered that even. But here's the problem with this: there are classes that can straight up just heal themselves. Like, what the hell? Like, so if you're a class that can't heal itself, overtime is like so silly in a round. It just picks a winner. Why not do something like, hey, healing kind of stops, and you gotta just kill. You just gotta commit and kill. You gotta iframe, get the grab, get the CC, and you gotta do it quickly because healing just suddenly becomes disabled. All of a sudden, that's a lot more interesting. Any class can almost win that over time. Like, that's kind of a crazy part about it, and it makes it more intense than just you win. Because it makes a 2v3 sometimes futile. And sometimes, yeah, you can win a 2v3 against a team that is nowhere near your level. And then that's how it works there. So I think that could be adjusted. I don't think that needs to be that way. And here's the thing: the other way I think would also have some more hyped plays when healing goes away. And if it's unranked, less people are just going to care that much. They're just going to want to play, have fun, give it their best shot, and then walk away and be a little happy that they got some things from a pass or from something else. You know, like, I think that's something they could do. But I do think Solaire as a mode needs more work, for sure. And I hope that they give it to him. But there is also the element of how to deal with PvP in BDO and how to approach it. And that's kind of the next part here. So, approaching PvP in BDO is tricky. I will say that. It's very tricky because you have to... So, I gotta give a little story here. I'm a PvP player. I've climbed in WoW ranked past 2k elo. I've played SWTORs ranked. I've played ESO Arena. If it's an MMO with a ranked form of PvP or some form of PvP, I've probably played it in my lifetime. And I enjoy it. I really enjoy it, MMO PvP. Is it always balanced? Nope. But there's something about MMO PvP that's just fun. But BDO required me to rewire my brain when it came to approaching PvP. You have to accept, if you want to have fun in PvP in this game, you have to accept that there's going to be a long time before you get to compete with players. There's going to be not just any players, like obviously if you're ahead in someone's gear, you can beat up the person who has lower gear than you, but there is always going to be, when you start out, a bunch of people who can one-tap you. It's going to take some time to get to the DP that you need so that stops happening, to get to the right DR you need for that to stop happening as frequently as you start going into the higher percentage of geared players. So that's something that you have to learn to accept, that's going to be the game for you. You're going to be bullied. You're going to get messed up when engaging in PvP in the early game for many hours, hundreds of hours, I might add, as a normal player. And when I say normal player, I'm not saying a casual player. I'm saying someone who wants to PvP, who's a hardcore player like me. If you are someone like me who is like, yeah, I love to PvP, I love to learn how to get good at it, that's the type of player I'm talking about. You're going to have a tough time because you're going to have to accept that you're not going to PvP for long periods of time. The next thing you got to do is you just got to accept that there is going to be RNG if you win some fights and if you don't. A lot of times your CC might get resisted multiple times in a row. Sometimes your combo is going to get resisted halfway through and the guy's going to get up and 2-tap you. It's going to happen. There's just things like that. It is the way it is. And that you have to come to terms with that and not lose your mind over it. Lastly, don't be fooled in thinking that this is a super skill-based game. Just like one of the things is, just because this game has a action fighter game style combat MMO, this is not a fighting game. This is a class-based MMO. There are going to be classes, and obviously this is assuming both players are at a decent skill level and understand how to play their classes. There's just going to be some classes that are better at killing you, just like you're going to be better at killing some classes, assuming player skill is relatively the same. Naturally, if you are way better at the game than someone and you know how to play it, you're going to just beat them. But that's not how you measure a skill-based game. A skill-based game is measured in, does every move feel equal? Does it feel fair? Like, mostly like a fighting game. If someone holds block in a fighting game, like I'm just using Mortal Kombat for example, you grab them. You know, if they are playing way too aggressive, you even out the frames with maybe a down punch, you know, and things like that. That's not how this game works. Sometimes your CC is going to land, sometimes it's not. It's not super skill based. Some classes are just really good counters towards you. Like, you know, like it's really easy for a warrior to go grab a Valk. It just happens. There's really not that much you can do about it. And yes, hindsight is always 20/20 because you could have stood there, but you know there's other things going on in a match too, not just that one person. You have to be prepared also to be gear checked for a long time. A lot of players that go hunting for PvP or looking to gank people, they're going to be higher gear. They're going to tap you, especially if you're on Arsha. And I'm talking, and keep in mind, if you're not a PvPer and you don't care about PvP, this whole video doesn't pertain to that at all. This is for people looking for PvP. This is for people who want to engage in this side of the game. You have to accept you're going to be gear checked for a long time, and you're not going to be a huge threat to a lot of the PvPers in the game. Don't get pulled into any PvP drama really early on. I always say that to help enjoy your PvP experience in this game. It's really easy to. You know, there's a lot of guild rivalries, there's a lot of trash talking at spots. Just try not to get too sucked into it and don't take it too personally. And next thing you do is you have to accept that it's going to take a long time before you get to engage in that really awesome endgame PvP that you see. And don't get me wrong, that part of the PvP, it has its flaws too, but it is fun making builds. It is fun being part of groups that know what they're doing. It is fun to push the itemization to the game to its limit. It is fun to try out different things and actually have the capability to try out different things, different crystal sets and stuff like that, because you are much stronger in the game. And try to enjoy the game where you can. And I always highly recommend that when you play this game for PvP is you just gotta make some friends. You know, like I think that's what really helps, is finding some friends who are okay with matching gear, who are okay with going into trials and things like that, and want to take the time to do that. Can make it more fun so you can do some fighting in between to break up the monotony of grinding. And that's super important, I think. But yeah, and to kind of bring it all together, BDO PvP is a bit of a mess in many ways. Some of its core design features, like RNG resist, they require a reassessment. A lot of things do in this game. A lot of classes kits also require reassessment. Should classes have unprotected combos? Should they? Should they not? And like, how should that be? And things like that. I think a lot of this stuff needs to be looked at, and why X class versus X class has its benefits. But at the end of the day, it's still fun. It's still fun to play. It's still different. It is still fun to fight in. It's fun to play the different classes. They all feel pretty good once you understand like how to operate them in PvP. There's still some positives to the PvP, but if the game wants to grow its PvP, if it wants more players to engage with it, it's going to need to improve its PvP experience. And some of those core features really need to be assessed. And hopefully, in time, PA will do that. But that's it for this long video that's going to be put together with these like 4 parts, I would say. You can like and subscribe. I don't know, do what you want. I'm not your dad. And yeah, thanks for making it this far.